It was meant to be another fun night of games, celebrity anecdotes, and Jimmy Fallon's trademark laughter. That's what the audience expected. That's what the producers planned for. That's what millions of viewers tuned in to see. But 7 minutes into the interview, Robert Downey Jr. leaned forward, lowered his voice, and uttered 4 words that left Jimmy Fallon completely speechless. For 12 full seconds, an eternity in television time, the Tonight Show host sat frozen, unable to respond, as the implications of what he'd just heard sank in. And across America, viewers who'd been casually watching suddenly found themselves witnessing the moment a beloved Hollywood icon revealed a truth so profound, so unexpected, that it would transform how millions of people understand the entertainment they consume, the technology they use, and the very nature of creativity in the modern age. The Tonight Show studio at 30 Rockefeller Plaza buzzed with its familiar pre-show energy. Pages in navy blazers guided the excited audience members to their seats. Stagehands made final adjustments to the iconic blue and gold set. The house band, The Roots, ran through sound checks while occasionally joking with crew members. The air carried that distinctive mix of excitement and professional focus that defines successful television productions, along with the faint scent of fresh paint and the cool, crisp atmosphere that TV studios maintain to keep hot lights from overheating the space. Jimmy Fallon moved through his pre-show routine with the practiced ease of someone who had hosted over 1,000 episodes. At 49, he still carried the boyish energy and expressive features that had made him a standout on Saturday Night Live 2 decades earlier. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit with a subtle pattern, he reviewed note cards, occasionally glancing up to chat with producers or make adjustments to planned segments. Despite his enormous success, Fallon never appeared to take himself too seriously, still seeming genuinely excited about each night's show. 5 minutes to places, called the floor director, and the energy in the room noticeably intensified. The guest dressing rooms at The Tonight Show were designed to make celebrities feel comfortable before their on-air appearances. When Robert Downey Jr. emerged from his, there was that subtle shift in the atmosphere that happens when someone with true star power enters a room. At 59, the actor had evolved from his earlier reputation as a troubled talent to become one of Hollywood's most respected and bankable stars. His Iron Man role had helped launch the most successful film franchise in history, but tonight he was here to discuss his latest project, a documentary series exploring the intersection of artificial intelligence and creativity. Dressed in his distinctively stylish yet slightly eccentric fashion, charcoal pants, a burgundy shirt with subtle geometric patterns, and tinted glasses that somehow only he could pull off, Downey carried himself with the relaxed confidence that comes from decades in the spotlight. He greeted crew members by name, remembering details about their families from previous visits to the show. "Good to see you, man," Jimmy said as they shook hands backstage. "Thanks for making time for us during your press tour." "Always a pleasure," Downey replied with that characteristic half-smile. "Your show lets conversations breathe. Rare these days." They chatted briefly about Downey's recent vacation in Italy and Fallon's daughters as final microphone checks were completed. There was an easy rapport between them, 2 entertainment veterans who respected each other's craft and had developed a friendly relationship over numerous interviews. The familiar Tonight Show theme played, and the studio audience applauded enthusiastically as Jimmy bounded onto the stage with his characteristic energy. After his monologue and a comedy bit involving audience members attempting to recreate famous movie scenes, it was time for the first guest. My first guest tonight is an Academy Award-nominated actor who has starred in some of the biggest films of all time. You know him as Tony Stark, Sherlock Holmes, and about 100 other unforgettable characters. His new documentary series, Creative Intelligence, premieres on Netflix this Friday. Please welcome Robert Downey Jr. The audience erupted in cheers as Downey walked out, waving casually to the crowd before embracing Jimmy in the brief backslapping hug that has become the standard greeting on late-night television. The Roots played an upbeat version of Back in Black, a nod to the first Iron Man film, as he took his seat and adjusted his jacket. The first few minutes proceeded as viewers might have expected. Light banter about Downey's travels, a funny story about his children, and gentle teasing about his notorious collection of unusual sunglasses. Jimmy was in his element, laughing perhaps a bit too enthusiastically at every quip, but creating the comfortable atmosphere that had made his interviews so popular. "So, this documentary series," Jimmy said, transitioning to the promotional portion of the segment. "It's all about AI and creativity, right? What made you want to explore that?" There was a subtle shift in Downey's posture, almost imperceptible, but the kind of thing that skilled actors recognize in each other. Jimmy, who had conducted thousands of interviews, caught it immediately. "Well, it started as something pretty conventional," Downey replied. "We were going to look at how AI tools are being used in different creative fields: music, visual art, screenwriting, that sort of thing. Standard documentary approach." He paused, taking a sip from his mug. Tonight Show guests always received their choice of beverage in the show's signature blue mug. But about 3 months into production, we stumbled onto something that changed the entire direction of the project. Jimmy leaned forward slightly, sensing that this was veering away from the usual promotional interview. "What do you mean?" Downey's expression shifted to something more serious than the Tonight Show audience was accustomed to seeing. "We were interviewing a developer who's been working on creative AI systems for one of the major tech companies. I won't name which one. Off camera, after we'd wrapped the formal interview, he started telling our director about something called synthetic creativity mapping. He thought we already knew about it." The control room grew quieter as producers sensed the interview taking an unscripted turn. Even the audience seemed to collectively lean forward, picking up on the subtle energy shift. "What is that exactly?" Jimmy asked, his typical rapid-fire hosting style slowing down to match Downey's more measured pace. That's when Downey leaned forward and said those 4 words. "They're mapping our imagination." Jimmy's expression froze in a half-smile that slowly faded as he processed what he'd just heard. For 12 long seconds, an eternity in television time, he said nothing. The audience, unsure if this was building to a punchline, remained silent. In the control room, producers exchanged confused glances, wondering if they should cut to commercial. "I'm not sure I understand what that means," Jimmy finally said, his voice lacking its usual performative enthusiasm. "Neither did we, at first," Downey acknowledged. But this developer explained that the major AI companies aren't just analyzing existing creative works anymore, the books, movies, songs, and art that they train their systems on. They've been quietly conducting what they call creative process studies for the past 3 years. He paused again, seeming to carefully consider his next words. They've been bringing in artists, writers, musicians, and filmmakers, thousands of them, under various pretexts, and using advanced neural scanning while these creatives ideate and develop new concepts. They're not just copying finished works anymore. They're mapping the human creative process itself, how imagination works. The studio had grown unusually quiet. Even the Roots, normally ready with musical punctuation for significant moments, seemed unsure how to respond to this unexpected turn. "That sounds invasive," Jimmy said, clearly struggling to find the right words for a conversation that had veered far from the light entertainment his show typically provided. "It goes beyond invasive," Downey continued, his intensity growing though his volume remained controlled. "These aren't just functional MRIs or simple brainwave monitoring. They're using proprietary technology that can track neural pathways with unprecedented precision. They can see exactly how creative connections form, which parts of the brain communicate with each other during different types of creative thinking." Jimmy, to his credit, recognized that something important was unfolding and abandoned his usual interview approach. "And the people participating in these studies, do they know what's happening?" "That's the thing," Downey replied, shaking his head slightly. "Most don't. They're told they're participating in studies about cognitive processes or problem-solving techniques. The contracts they sign include obscure clauses about data collection and intellectual property that most people don't fully read or understand." The control room was now in visible disarray. This was not the celebrity promotional interview anyone had expected. A commercial break was overdue, but cutting now would seem like an attempt to silence an increasingly significant conversation. "So why is this concerning?" Jimmy asked, giving voice to the question likely forming in viewers' minds. I mean, studying creativity sounds like it could be beneficial, right? Downey's expression softened slightly, appreciating the intelligent question beneath Jimmy's typically lighthearted persona. In theory, yes, but here's what our investigation uncovered. These companies aren't studying creativity to enhance human potential. They're mapping it so they can replicate it, predict it, and ultimately replace it. He continued with increasing urgency, explaining how the data from these studies was being used to develop AI systems that could not just mimic human creative works, but anticipate new creative directions before humans themselves got there. Think about what that means, Jimmy. It's not just about AI writing a screenplay or composing a song that feels like a human made it. It's about creating systems that can predict where human creativity would go next, the next artistic movement, the next storytelling innovation, the next musical evolution, and get there first. As Downey spoke, something remarkable was happening. This wasn't the typical late-night segment where viewers might half-watch while scrolling through their phones. Across America, people were stopping what they were doing, turning up the volume and calling family members into the room. The conversation had tapped into something profound about the relationship between humanity and technology in the digital age. But why would companies want to do that? Jimmy asked the question that was undoubtedly on many viewers' minds. Control of the creative economy, Downey answered without hesitation. Think about it. The entertainment industry alone is worth trillions. Whoever controls the next generation of creativity controls culture itself, and ultimately, whoever controls culture shapes society's values, perspectives, and decisions. The planned commercial break was now significantly overdue, but the show's executive producer had decided to let the conversation continue uninterrupted. This had transcended a typical celebrity interview to become something more significant, a moment of public revelation about technologies developing behind closed doors. So, what are you doing about this? Jimmy asked the question, pointing toward action rather than just alarm. That's actually why I'm here tonight specifically, Downey said, his expression brightening slightly. Because today, we're launching what we're calling the Imagination Coalition, a multidisciplinary initiative to establish ethical guidelines and legal protections for human creativity in the age of artificial intelligence. He explained that the documentary series had evolved from a simple exploration into a call to action. Instead of just documenting the intersection of AI and creativity, it was now revealing these hidden mapping practices and proposing a framework for how creative AI could be developed ethically, with transparency and proper consent from human participants. The most important element, Downey continued, is what we're calling the Creative Commons of Consciousness, a legal and ethical framework that establishes human imagination as a protected resource, not just another dataset to be harvested. As he outlined the initiative, Jimmy's demeanor had completely transformed from entertainer to engaged citizen. This is a lot bigger than what we usually talk about on this show, he admitted with surprising candor. That's exactly why I wanted to introduce it here, Downey replied. Not on a news program or a tech podcast where it might be dismissed as a specialized concern. This affects everyone who creates, consumes, or values human expression, which is all of us. The commercial break finally came, but the energy in the studio had fundamentally shifted. During the break, audience members could be heard discussing the implications of what they'd just heard, many pulling out phones to look up the Imagination Coalition website that Downey had mentioned. When the cameras returned, Jimmy addressed viewers directly. If you're just joining us, Robert Downey Jr. has shared some pretty mind-blowing information about how AI companies are mapping human creativity, and he's launching an initiative to protect imagination as a human resource. Robert, I have to ask, aren't you concerned about potential pushback from these powerful tech companies? Downey nodded, acknowledging the question's validity. Of course. These are some of the wealthiest and most influential entities on the planet. But that's exactly why this conversation needs to happen now, while human creativity still has a fighting chance. As the interview continued, Downey shared more details about the coalition, which included artists, technologists, neuroscientists, legal experts, and ethicists working together to establish boundaries around how creativity could be studied and replicated. The initiative wasn't anti-technology, he emphasized, but pro-transparency and pro-consent. "We're not saying AI shouldn't be creative," he explained. "We're saying that if companies want to map human imagination to develop these systems, they need to be honest about what they're doing, obtain proper informed consent, and ensure that the humans whose creative processes are being studied retain rights to their cognitive contributions." As the segment approached its conclusion, Jimmy asked what would prove to be one of the most compelling questions of the night. "After everything you've learned making this documentary, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of human creativity?" Downey took a moment before answering, his expression thoughtful. "I'm conditionally optimistic," he said finally. "Human imagination is remarkably resilient and has qualities that I believe will always distinguish it from synthetic creativity. But that's only true if we value it, protect it, and create systems that enhance rather than exploit it." He continued, "What gives me hope is that once people understand what's at stake, they tend to care deeply about this issue. It transcends political divides, generational gaps, and cultural differences. Whether you're a conservative grandfather in rural America or a progressive teen in an urban center, human imagination and creativity are values worth preserving." The interview ended with Jimmy thanking Robert for his candor and courage in bringing this issue to light. As the closing theme played and the cameras pulled back, the audience rose in spontaneous applause, not the typical appreciation for a celebrity's presence, but something that felt more like recognition of having witnessed an important moment. What followed over the next several hours would exceed anything The Tonight Show or Downey's publicity team could have anticipated. Clips of the interview spread with unprecedented velocity across all platforms. Unlike typical viral content designed to provoke outrage or simple amusement, these clips sparked something different. A substantive conversation about the nature of creativity and the ethical boundaries of artificial intelligence. By midnight, Hatard Imagination, Coalition, and At Their Mapping. Our Imagination were trending worldwide. By sunrise, the Coalition's website had received over 15 million visitors. By noon the following day, several prominent artists and creators from diverse fields had publicly joined the initiative, adding their voices to the call for creative transparency and ethical AI development. The response from tech companies came swiftly, as Downey had predicted. Official statements emphasized the beneficial aspects of creative AI research while downplaying or denying the specific mapping practices he had described. Anonymous sources in technology publications suggested he was exaggerating capabilities or misunderstanding standard research protocols. Some commentary attempted to frame the concerns as Luddite resistance to inevitable progress. But unlike previous cycles of concern about technology that quickly faded from public consciousness, this conversation showed remarkable staying power. Perhaps it was the messenger. Downey wasn't a typical activist, but a beloved cultural figure whose own creative contributions had shaped a generation. Perhaps it was the timing, coming as many creative professionals were already experiencing the disruptive impact of generative AI on their livelihoods. Or perhaps it was simply that the idea of imagination as something uniquely, preciously human resonated deeply across demographic and ideological lines. 3 weeks after the Tonight Show interview, a bipartisan group of senators announced hearings on ethical boundaries in artificial intelligence research, with a particular focus on transparency in human subjects research for AI development. The hearings would include testimony from neuroscientists, AI ethicists, creative professionals, and technology executives. Most remarkably, ordinary people began changing how they thought about creativity and technology. Parents initiated conversations with children about the value of original thinking in an age of abundant synthetic content. Educational institutions developed new approaches to nurturing human imagination alongside technological literacy. Community art spaces reported increased participation as people sought to reconnect with their creative capacities. 6 months later, Jimmy Fallon invited Robert Downey Jr. back to The Tonight Show for a follow-up conversation. The contrast with their first interview was striking. Where the initial revelation had been unexpected and somewhat jarring for the show's typically light format, this discussion felt more measured and forward-looking. The most encouraging development, Downey shared, has been seeing the Creativity Transparency Act moving through Congress with support from both parties. When was the last time we saw that kind of bipartisan action on technology regulation? The legislation would require companies conducting neural monitoring for AI development to provide explicit disclosure to participants about how their data would be used, ensure appropriate compensation for creative contributions, and establish boundaries around what aspects of the creative process could be mapped and replicated. More significantly, several major technology companies had proactively announced new ethical frameworks for their creative AI research, inviting independent oversight and establishing clearer boundaries around consent and compensation. I think they recognize that public trust is ultimately good business, Downey observed. People don't want to live in a world where their deepest creative impulses are just more data to be harvested. Even the companies developing these technologies understand that a backlash against perceived exploitation would ultimately harm their long-term interests. The follow-up interview explored concrete examples of how the conversation was changing, from new university courses on creative ethics in the AI age to artist collectives developing alternative models for collaboration with AI systems that preserved human agency and attribution. What's been most powerful to witness, Downey explained, is seeing people reclaim a sense of value in human creativity that many had started to lose. There was this creeping notion that if AI could make a decent painting or write a passable song, maybe human creativity wasn't all that special after all. What we're seeing now is a renewed appreciation for the qualities that make human imagination unique, its connection to lived experience, its cultural context, its emotional depth. As the second interview concluded, Jimmy asked what had become a central question in the ongoing conversation. After everything that's happened since our last talk, what would you say is the most important lesson for people to take away about creativity and technology? Downey considered this carefully before responding. I think it's that technology is always a reflection of our values, not just our capabilities. We can build AI systems that diminish human creativity, or we can build ones that amplify it. The difference isn't primarily technical, it's about what we choose to prioritize and protect. He continued, the companies developing these technologies aren't villains. They're responding to incentives and pursuing possibilities, as innovation has always done. Our job as a society is to establish boundaries that ensure this innovation serves human flourishing rather than undermining it. With unexpected emotion, he added, most importantly, I've learned that when people understand what's at stake, they care deeply about preserving the sanctity of human imagination. That capacity to envision what doesn't yet exist, to make mental leaps between unconnected ideas, to express the inexpressible, it's not just a nice feature of being human, it's essential to who we are. The movement sparked by that initial conversation continues to evolve today. The Imagination Coalition has expanded beyond its original focus to address broader questions about human agency in an age of increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence. New creative tools are being developed that explicitly enhance human imagination rather than seeking to replicate or replace it. Educational approaches increasingly emphasize the kinds of creative thinking that remain distinctively human. Perhaps most importantly, the conversation has helped reshape how people understand creativity itself, not as a product to be consumed or a commodity to be algorithmically optimized, but as a fundamental expression of human consciousness worthy of protection and nurture. As Downey noted in the follow-up interview, the most profound technologies aren't the ones that do things for us, but the ones that help us become more fully ourselves. I hope that we're moving toward an understanding of AI not as a replacement for human creativity, but as a collaborator in exploring new creative frontiers that neither could reach alone. For those watching this video who've been part of this unfolding story, I'd love to hear your perspective. How has your relationship with creativity and technology evolved since these issues came to light? Have you noticed changes in how you approach your creative expression? What aspects of human imagination do you believe are most important to preserve as AI continues to develop? Like and subscribe to join our growing community dedicated to exploring the evolving relationship between human creativity and advancing technology. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our continuing coverage of the Imagination Coalition's work and practical strategies for nurturing authentic, creative expression in the digital age. Remember, every comment you share helps others reflect on their creative potential in this rapidly changing landscape. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to reconnect with their imaginative capacity. Together, we're not just protecting creativity from exploitation, we're reimagining what it means to be creative in an age where the boundaries between human and artificial expression are increasingly fluid.